We'll get to Grayson's grades in a second, but first we'll bring Scott Grayson in to find out his thoughts on the big trade that was announced today. I don't know if he was surprised when I saw it pop into my email. I thought, well, that makes sense. Curious to find out your reaction, Scott Grayson, to Jordan Matthews being traded to the Bills for corner Ronald Darby.
First of all, always good to hear your voice, PT. Good to talk to you again. And, honestly, I think I was surprised when I saw it, but only for a moment. And then everything kind of clicked and made sense for me. And I really think it's a good trade for both teams. It certainly helps the Eagles in a way they desperately need some help, which is back at the corner area. And then, I think they really felt like they were good to go in the receiver department, especially with what Matt Collins did last night. I really like what he did, and I know we'll get to that in grades, but I think he really helped show them that they have some depth there, and it does put another vote of confidence in the column of Nelson Aguilar, which I'm hesitant and reluctant to do because I've done that a couple of times in seasons past, just to have him drop the ball literally and figuratively. So, we'll see how it goes, but at this point, I like the deal. You get a third-round pick on top of a very serviceable player that can start for you.
Now, Scott, Josh thought that the Eagles might have overpaid a little bit by sending out that third-round draft pick, and we dug up the Eagles draft guide, and some of the names when you go back through that third round, Isaac Seumalo, Jordan Hicks, Benny Logan, in recent times, those are pretty good, but that's also a third round that has the history of guys like Stuart Bradley, Tony Hunt, Chris Gokong, Ryan Moats, Daniel Teo Nasham. Was the price too high that they paid?
I don't think so, because I think they view it as they were going to have to pay. They were either going to let Jordan Matthews walk after this year, or they were going to have to pay him a lot of money. And I think they view it as, instead of paying the money, they're paying by draft pick, and they're willing to look at potentially paying Darby if he pans out here in this defense at the end of this season. So I think you look at it that way, and it's not such of a much of a stretch. But I mean, anytime you're giving up draft picks, it definitely does hurt on draft day. And but Howie also has a way of wheeling and dealing and getting picks back through other deals in the future. So let's see when next year's draft rolls around, if in fact that third round pick is worth it or not, and might have overpaid for it. At this point, I'm willing to say I'm okay with it.
Scott Deshaun, let's get into your grades. Last night you gave a couple players an A, which we talked last week about how hard it is to get an A. Could you kind of talk about guys in particular that you have on here, the receivers, Hollins and Treggs?
Yeah, we'll start with Hollins, like you said, and like I was just talking about as part of the reason I'm okay with the Jordan Matthews trade. I mean, here's a guy as a rookie who came in, and I mean, at the beginning of the game in the first quarter, when you have starters on the field, I mean, he was dropping some stiff arms left and right on that touchdown run that really made me excited, in the sense that here's a physical guy who's willing to take a hit and not shy away from it, but run through it and continue going down the field. That's something we haven't seen a lot of around here in recent years. So I love seeing that, because yards after the catch can sometimes be really huge, especially in, this kind of an offense. I also gave an A to Fletcher Cox. I mean, we did talk about why it's hard to give an A in preseason, and it is just because you don't see a lot of these guys. But at the time he was there, Cox showed me he's going to do and continue to do exactly what he's been doing in years past, forcing the fumble, and doing that kind of thing in the game. Derek Barnett, I was really excited by this guy too, another rookie, first-round pick for the Eagles. I liked seeing the way he got off the line. I liked seeing the way he handled some of the guys opposite him. And, it was hard not to give him an A, because I thought about giving him a B from the simple standpoint that he did it against second-teamers for the most part on Green Bay. He wasn't in there at the beginning of the game against the starters. So it was a great building block, great for him to get the confidence. I ultimately gave him the A because I liked the way he was very active, got through and even got a couple of sacks actually in the game. And I think honestly that they're going to get what they need out of him.
All right, Scott, let's go over to now the players that didn't do so well. You gave Trey Burton a C. I personally thought he should have got a D, but could you kind of elaborate on why Trey Burton got the average grade instead of the below?
Partly for the lack of sample size. I mean, I got, it really does stink that when you fumble the ball and then they turn it into a touchdown after it. I mean, you're right. It was one of those CD gray areas that he could have very easily gotten a D. And either way, I mean, a C is nothing to write Mom about, tell her what he got. Not that he's really worried about my grades, but I would say that, look, I like what Trey Burton does for this team. I like what he's able to do, the depth he gives at that position. Certainly he's going to get a lot of good grades throughout the season. And I'm not worried about him. Sometimes you get into this area and you go, oh, here's a guy down at the lower grade. And if he stays down there for multiple weeks, you go, wow, what's wrong with this guy? I'm not worried about Trey Burton. I know he'll be fine, and he will learn from not holding on to that ball that he needs to, because obviously that was a huge play. And if it were a regular season game, it would have been crucial to have then turned that around into a touchdown for Green Bay. So Burton, I'm not too worried about. Could have gotten a D, sure, but not a great game for him, definitely.
Scott Grayson's with us. Grayson's grades, a nice edition of that after the Eagles lose, though, 24-9. It is the preseason game number 1, and you can read all his grades on our website at 973ESPN.com. Scott, we always like to get out that red pen, too, and see who darn near failed or just barely passed the class, but only with a D. A couple of D grades for you, 3 of them, in fact. Maybe you could discuss who got Ds and why.
Yeah, I gave Donnell Pumphrey, C.J. Smith, and Matt McGloin D's, and I'll start at the top there with Pumphrey. I was just a little turned off by the fact that he had trouble hanging on to the ball, particularly early in the game. He muffed a punt, fumbled a carry that the Eagles were fortunate enough to recover. And you know what? He's a rookie, and, I'm willing to sit here in the first preseason game and go, look, I can see how valuable he's going to be in this offense, and they were just trying to get him as many reps in the NFL game here as possible yesterday, because you didn't see Darren Sproles, and for good reason. I mean, they know what he can do. They don't need him to risk getting hurt. So, what I was impressed with, too, though, on one side was Pumphrey took some big hits. And I was worried about how he's going to do when he gets squared up by somebody. Is he even going to get up? And he did multiple times. And look, I like where he's going to go. I know that the ceiling is high on him. And I'm not worried about him, like I talked about with Trey Burton. Not worried about Donnell Pumphrey. I know he's going to produce. But he needs to make sure he holds on to that ball. And, again, that's something I'm confident he will learn from as the staff goes over that with film. C.J. Smith, he got beat too many times on the corner, particularly on one drive. He just seemed like he got abused and eventually gave up a touchdown. That right there really turned me off. He came back from that with a short-term memory and made a nice play to break up a pass. But he's got to be able to avoid that, because we've seen enough of the corners getting beat around here on double moves and things like that the last few years. So C.J. Smith, if he wants to play in my book, really has to stop that kind of thing. Can't gamble out there. He's got to make sure he locks down the route and the receiver that he's taken on. Matt McGloin, way too ugly, threw off his back foot way too many times. Now here's a third-string quarterback being asked to play 3 quarters over that of the game because Nick Foles has a sore arm. So I get that. But as you're looking at it, great opportunity for him to show what he could do. 205 yards passing, 1 interception on a very poorly thrown ball to Pumphrey that went over his head and was picked off. So a lot of things I didn't like from McGloin, but again, we're looking at a third-string quarterback here, and I'm not really thinking we're going to see much of him during the regular season, because if we do, things have really gone south at the quarterback position.
Scott Grayson's with us. We've got Grayson's grades open on who he thought performed well and who he thought did not perform well in the Eagles-Packers preseason game last night. You talked about some of your A's, Scott, when we opened the segment, but we'll let you discuss some of the names that were in the B category. I mean, well, you don't have to discuss the guy that's leaving. We know Jordan Matthews is no longer here, so we can, scratch him right off the report card and just go to the other 3 guys that you thought earned a B grade.
Yeah, Patrick Robinson, an 8-year veteran at corner. I like the way he was around the ball a lot when he was in the game, and it seemed like he was constantly there. And like you're talking about a veteran corner, that's great. Now they're going to add this other one, another veteran corner in Darby from this trade. And now I'm starting to kind of get excited about some of that, because now you have Rasul Douglas, and then you've got Smith from Washington that you drafted that's going to be great to have as well down the road. He won't be ready probably until late this year at the earliest. But Patrick Robinson, to me, was nice to see in terms of building that first block and getting a grasp of what we're getting at that position, because there's a huge hole there. And he's got to be one of the guys who steps up and says, I'm going to take one of these starting jobs. So I like what I saw from him just with his ball hawking ability and being around the ball. So we'll see if that continues through the preseason. Michael Kendricks made a lot of noise early in training camp because he, had talked about requesting a trade. Says he's going to play under the contract, and he did a really good job on one play in particular, chipping a receiver, throwing off the timing of the route, slipping underneath of it, picking off the pass, and right after the Eagles had turned the ball over, right before that on a fumble. So a big play by Kendricks, and he's going to be there for depth. I know he's trying to get out of the doghouse with with Jim Schwartz, and maybe a play like that will help. The other name there is Corey Clement, running back, who you hadn't heard too much about, but really showed some good speed and agility to try to avoid some tackles and really made some nice runs. Again, the counter to that and the asterisk is it was late in the game when you're playing against probably third-team defenders for Green Bay. So some of these guys, it's more of what can you do when you get the chance against the starters, and maybe we'll find some of that out in the next couple of weeks.
He's Scott Grayson. He's our 97.3 ESPN Eagles beat reporter, and also each week we get Grayson's grades from him to talk all things Eagles. It's kind of a fun karma thing, right, Scott? Now they trade Jordan Matthews, and who do they play next in the preseason at home next Thursday? Oh, that's right, Jordan Matthews and the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, it is funny how that works out, right? Don't forget, Lucinda McCoy will be back too. So you've got plenty of things to make a preseason game that would otherwise be meaningless, somewhat at least partially meaningful.
We've told all the wait staff in the Delaware Valley to, bulk up on their tips before they serve any players from. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. All right, it's the Sports Bash. Thanks, Scott. We appreciate it. Thank you for your Grayson's grades. And, of course, we'll check in with you again real soon. Thank you, buddy.